Hello, world, and welcome back to the Simple Sports Podcast. It is I, of course, Capo, and again, we are back looking ahead to Week 6. No Thursday Night Football this week. Unfortunate, we did get Tuesday Night Football. My Titans got a huge win over the Bills. Even surprised myself, considering, the situation, no practices, etc., etc. I still would have picked them to win. Certainly not the way that they did, though. So, congrats, props. 4-0 for the first time since I believe 2008 when they started the year 13-0, only to lose in the first round to the Ravens. It's been different. Not gonna lie. Usually by this point they're 2-2, maybe 3-1. Most likely 2-2, maybe even 1-3. They've just not been. They didn't get up to a hot start. They didn't last year, only to win a bunch of games heading out into the end of the season. So it's different, but it's nice to see that they are at least playing up to expectations, which, to be perfectly honest, there aren't a lot by most people. Most people still seem to really not respect them at all, which, hey, it is what it is. Like, I'm not necessarily asking for respect. It's just weird to see a team that had as good of a year as they did last year, especially to close out the season, did as good as they did in the playoffs on the road against the two best teams, or at least two of the best teams in the AFC, had a good showing through 2.5, 3 quarters against the eventual Super Bowl champs. And most people had them at best third in the division behind the Colts and the Texans. Didn't make any sense to me then. Still doesn't make any sense to me now. There are still people that are out on the Titans and picking the Colts to win that division, and I just don't see it with Phillip Rivers. But we'll talk about that a little bit later on. But happy for the win. I think it was 42-16 ended up being the final score, and it was indeed a rout, to say the least. Today, however, we'll spend a little bit of time talking about the Texans and the Titans matchup, AFC South matchup. Always tricky when you're playing in division. Texans and Colts have always been the bugaboo of the Titans, even in the last couple of years when they were 9-7, 4 years in a row. Still found ways to lose to both those teams. So it'll be interesting to see this week. Obviously, the Texans are reeling with their situation, just fired their head coach. They lost the best player aside from Deshaun Watson on offense. So we'll talk about that. But I want to start really quickly with two other games. First of all, Cowboys and the Cardinals, going to be a good one, I believe. But we get to see what life is like for the Cowboys without Dak Prescott, right? For the first time, no Dak Prescott since 2016 when he took over. Aside from, I think, missing one game at the end of the year because they had their seed locked up. Hasn't missed a start, no injuries. And now he's gone for the season, potentially, depending on how things go. Could be gone for good. I doubt it, but that's definitely on the table. Let's not pretend like it's not. And we'll talk about it more specifically a little bit later on. But people seem to just think that there's such a major gap between Dak Prescott and Andy Dalton. I just don't see it that way. At worst case scenario, they're the same guy. Obviously, Dak's a little bit more mobile in the pocket and can run a little bit more. But Andy Dalton's no slouch, and he's not a bad quarterback. He's not a great quarterback, but neither is Dak Prescott. So we'll talk about that a little bit. And then the other big game that's on my list is the Browns versus the Steelers. Now, for me, this is the Browns' first real test. A lot of people thought it was last week, and even after beating the Colts, some people still said, well, I don't know, it's the Colts. And here's the thing, especially with two teams in particular, the Browns and the Titans. The Browns especially, but they have the same results for different reasons. The Browns have been so bad for so long that I don't think people want to acknowledge that they're a good football team. It's as if it's like it's a mirage. It's not real. And the reality is, yeah, they're pretty good. They're not great. They still got some problems, injuries in the secondary. Baker is still playing pretty inconsistently, but for the most part, listen, they can run the football and they can play defense. It's not the best defense in football. Is it a top 10 defense? I mean, you could argue, given the injuries and the circumstances, you could argue it's a top 10 defense. It's close. It's not one of the worst defenses in the league. Again, they're dealing with a lot of injuries. They do have one of the best pass rushers, if not the best pass rusher in football, in Myles Garrett. Obviously has his name in the hat for Defensive Player of the Year. I'm anxious to see how that looks against the Steelers' offensive line. How are they going to be able to keep Ben upright if they can? That's going to be the key for them. And of course, you got the Steelers defense, who I think is slipping a little bit. Listen, they're slipping from where they are is, still top 5, so let's not get it twisted. It's still an excellent defense. But I said this going into the year. I said it when we started the year, a few games in, and I'll say it again. It's hard to repeat the level of performance that they had last year. And that's what they need in order for this team to be a true Super Bowl contender. Because I don't see it with Big Ben. And I love their offensive weapons for what they are. But if Claypool is going to be your number one, which it looks like to me he is a true number one, even better than Juju and the other guys that they have there. Is he dependable enough as a rookie to get them where they need to be? Maybe. I mean, he's explosive, but is he dependable enough to get them where they need to be? Now, I'm not so sure. And Big Ben, to this point, doesn't look like he can elevate those around him any longer. I think he can certainly steer the ship, as I like to say often, but I'm not seeing him elevate guys around him. And what's more concerning is he physically let's be honest, he doesn't look the same. He's not the only one. But there's a lot of guys, Drew Brees, Tom Brady, physically they just don't look the same. Big Ben is a little bit younger than those guys, but Big Ben has been beat up far more than either of those other two guys and a few others. And listen, you can say what you want. They're undefeated, all that good stuff. My eyes don't lie to me. And, I trust my eyes. I go with what I see, not what the numbers say. And to me, it's not going to get it done with Big Ben and the weapons that they have. Now, they can make a move to pull somebody. I thought maybe they would be in the running for L. Bell, although in hindsight didn't seem likely. It just, from a story standpoint, it would have made sense, I guess, in that regard. But overall, no, it didn't really make a whole lot of sense. I'm interested to see this game because, like I said, I think it's the first real test for the Browns. And I think what's going to happen is the Steelers are going to get exposed here because, yeah, the Browns aren't excellent on offense, especially in the passing game, but they are excellent in the run game. And with their play action, if they can keep Baker Mayfield upright, away from TJ Watt, away from Bud Dupree, and out of making mistakes, I really don't think the Steelers can combat them offensively. Now, can they hang in the game because their defense keeps them in the game? Absolutely. But if the Browns can figure out a way to put some points on the board, I just don't think the Steelers can respond at the same level offensively that the Browns are capable of. So that's my outtake on that. We'll talk about it a little bit more a little bit later on. But today, of course, we got to get to the picks. A little bit later on, we'll talk a little bit about Draftkings. But let's start with our picks for Week 6. All right, so up first, Bears at the Panthers. I got the Bears +1. It's just a simple fact here. The Panthers, a lot of people like the Panthers, and that's fine. They're 3-2. They look better, far better than I thought they would. But let's not overreact here, okay? This is not a playoff caliber team. They got to beat out 2 teams in their own division, first of all. Okay, so that means they're going to have to win probably close to, if not 10 games. And I just don't see them winning 10 games. As much of a surprise as they've been, as much improved as they've looked week after week, not sure they can get to 10 wins. And I got the Bears +1 here. Basically, they just need to win the game. And if you're asking me, looking at the roster, maybe the coaching selection is a little bit of a wash, maybe a push, I should say. Maybe slightly in favor of Nagy just due to experience and being in the league longer, but neither coach blows me away per se. Now, you can argue Nagy is the clear, I guess, offensive mind in those two. But you can't argue against the fact that Matt Rule is coming to Carolina, and I mean they've won games even without their best player in Christian McCaffrey. They've won games, so you got to give them props there. I just think overall the Bears are a better team. The Panthers, however, no sacks, and this is going to be a key. No sacks allowed in 2 straight games. Can they keep that up against Khalil Mack and Akeem Hicks? Both of them have 3.5 sacks each. That pass rush is potentially the best in football. It is scary to watch. So that's going to be a key. Can they protect Teddy Bridgewater from those 2 guys? And also on the other side, can they generate a pass rush themselves? K'Wan Short lost for the season, and Brian Burns is doubtful for the game. I think he's in concussion protocol from last week, so he may not play. How are they going to get here? Here's one thing you can't do. I don't care how good or bad of a quarterback you think someone is. You can say what you want about Trubisky and or Nick Foles. Here's what I know about football. You give any quarterback time to operate. Any quarterback in the NFL that is at least a starter, maybe some backups are still incapable, whatever. If you give someone that's a starter or starter level, even the average guy, if you give him time to operate, he can pick you apart. And if they can't get to Nick Foles, he does have enough weapons to make things happen. He's got Allen Robinson. He's got, I always get Montgomery and Singletary mixed up. Montgomery, though. Thought they would be in the running for L. Bell. He's got enough weapons offensively to score. He's got a creative enough coach to put guys in position to score. And defensively, they are raw. And even if you were to say offensively the Panthers are better, their defense, the Bears' defense, is so significantly better than the Panthers that I don't think they're going to be able to match up. Panthers wide receiver, though, Robbie Anderson now has 300-yard games through 5 games this year. That's going to be huge for them because the Bears' corners are legit. And listen, Robbie Anderson is a nice receiver, very solid production. He ain't no number 1. And he's not beating those guys in Chicago like he's been beating guys on the Jets and whoever else, or excuse me, when he was with the Jets. I just don't think that they're as good as the Bears. I like the Bears +1 here. Lions -3 at Jacksonville. Lions are giving up an NFL worst, almost 171 yards per game rushing. And just last week after the game, Jay Gruden admitted, he thinks that he abandoned the run way too soon in each of the Jaguars' 2 games, or the last 2 games. To me, that sounds like a big, heavy dose of James Robinson, but it also could be coach's speak. You never know in Jacksonville. I'm not really sure they know what they're doing. Here's what I do know. Detroit is 7-1, coming off a bye against the spread since 2012. And to boot, they are playing the Jaguars, who are usually as ill-prepared as any other team you could find in the league. I like the Lions here, -3 on the road in Jacksonville. Another one that so I've always said, or at least in recent times, I've said that there's 2 teams I'm just not putting my money on. One's the Jets, obviously. The other is the Falcons. And, I don't like betting on bad teams, but they're playing the Vikings who, they're not that great themselves. I mean, let's be perfectly honest here. They beat a few bad teams and they got smoked by a few good teams. That's usually a recipe for a team that's not going to be very good. Are they better than the Falcons? Yeah, of course they are. The Falcons are just terrible. But here's the thing. There's a lot of emotion and human elements to this game. The Walking Dead, Matt Ryan, just has 1 touchdown over the past 3 weeks, 114 attempts. He's got 1 touchdown in 3 weeks. It's killing me in fantasy. That is good enough for 24th in quarterbacks in terms of fantasy play, just behind, or just ahead, I should say, of Sam Darnold, which he's not playing right now. He's hurt, whatever the case may be, but he's not playing. That's not good if you're Matt Ryan. And that explains why they are 0-5, probably going to be 0-6. But 4 points for a team that is potentially as explosive offensively as the Vikings are, or as the Falcons are, and going up against a team that defensively is just, they're okay. They're not great. I think offensively the Falcons get a bounce back here. I think the firing of Dan Quinn breathes a little life into them, not necessarily in a good way as far as, oh, we're so glad that Dan Quinn's gone, but just the fact that that burden isn't on them anymore. It's like, okay, regardless of where we are now, no more Dan Quinn. We got to go out and play football. And I think just having that burden lifted from those players and the rest of the organization, I think they can make this game a lot closer. I like the 4 points here, especially with them being at home. The question you have to ask is, can a team desperately clinging to playoff hope in the Vikings keep on hoping on or keep on hanging on versus a team that is, they got nothing to lose. They're swinging for the fences. They're just trying to not completely stink. Maybe they could turn around. It's still early enough that if they get on the roll, obviously they can turn around. Don't think that's likely, but you have to have that belief as a team and as a player. I like the 4 points. I like the Falcons here. Up next, Titans -3.5 versus the Texans. Titans at home. Simmons, Clowney, Harold Landry, Vic Beasley all will play, and they're going to need it because they're going to need to keep Deshaun Watson from extending plays. It's something that he's great at. He still struggles with anticipation at times. He still struggles with seeing some defenses at times, et cetera, et cetera. Still runs into sacks at times. But one thing he's great at, a lot of these young quarterbacks are great at, is extending the play, and he's one of the best in the league at doing so. Now, Watson has been sacked 17 times. That's third in the NFL, third most in the NFL. It's been an ongoing epidemic with these young quarterbacks and getting hit early on in their career. You look at Andrew Luck. I mean, you can go back farther than Andrew Luck, but just in recent memory, you look at Andrew Luck. I mean, just look at the division that they're in. Luck, sacked a lot. Watson, sacked a lot. Mariota, not nearly as good as both of those guys, but still sacked a lot. And you see it right now happening with Joe Burrow. Joe Burrow is getting killed on a weekly basis, largely due to his offensive line. And again, none of these guys are without fault. They run themselves into a lot of sacks. They hang onto the ball a touch too long and end up getting hit. The anticipation at times is not there, and they miss throws or they miss the window to throw. It opens and closes fast, and now they got nowhere to go. End up taking the sack. They're not being protected, and in fairness, like I said, they are getting themselves in trouble. This is a recipe for disaster, and it is something that the Titans are going to need to capitalize on. They paid Clowney a decent amount of money. It wasn't the huge contract, but they paid him a decent chunk of money. Got Vic Beasley. You drafted Harold Landry a few years ago. Drafted Jeffrey Simmons last year. Both of them, I like the guys they drafted. Also like Vic Beasley with whatever he has left. I like Clowney. His impact hasn't been felt through stats yet as far as how many sacks he has. Doesn't have any on the year. But you can see if you're watching the game, you see the pressures he creates. He deflects those screen passes. He's added a few of those. One he should have picked off last week. So he's not been a bust by any stretch. But I still would like to see him apply a little bit more pressure in terms of actually getting the quarterback on the ground. I think it's as much to do with him playing his way into game shape as anything else. That's not to say that's the only thing, but I think that's certainly a part of it. Now, I talked about the Titans earlier as far as their hot start. One thing that I enjoy is the fact that you can say what you want about Ryan Tannehill, but he's playing well for this organization. They are 11-3 since Tannehill took over and have averaged 30 points a game. It is something in Tennessee we have not seen. I don't know the last time, if they ever have averaged 30 points a game. It was never something that they did as far as being an explosive offense. And now, they are a team that can hit you in 3-4 plays and they can be on the board. A.J. Brown, Johnny Smith, Derrick Henry can take it to the house. Khalil Raymond, who I'm really starting to like. He was a return guy for a few years. Didn't play much as a receiver. Guys got hurt. He ended up stepping in, and he reminds me a lot of McCole Hardman in Kansas City. I think McCole overall is a little bit more explosive, but he's a little bit more solid. And I think paired with the speed and size of A.J. Brown, Corey Davis is what he is. Adam Humphries is what he is. And Johnny Smith is a lot of speed at tight end. He's not as big as the other guys like Kelsey and whoever else you want to throw in there. But speed-wise, he's probably the shiftiest and the fastest of all of them. So I like that combination. And then, like I said, Khalil Raymond he's growing on me. I think he went to. I'm not even going to speculate on where he went to college. It was a small school, and like I said, didn't play a whole lot. Return guy, but the more he plays, it seems like the more they like it, and the more they go to him. And Ryan Tannehill seems to trust him. He didn't have a few guys last week, and he was a big part of the offense along with AJ Brown. So I like the Titans -3.5 at home versus the Texans. Big time win, AFC South, second one. I think this is second game within the conference, and their first 5-0 start again since '08. I think is on the board. I like Titans -3.5. Giants. I like the Giants here -3 versus Washington at home. Here's the thing. Chase Young, that defensive line, Montez Sweat, they're going to eat Andrew Thomas and Cam Fleming alive. Andrew Thomas, the fourth pick in the draft, really struggling. He is 61 out of 68 in tackles in terms of pass pro wins. That's just not good. That's like Nate Solder his last couple years with Eli Manning. Like, that's just not good. And Montez Sweat, again, he gets a matchup with Cam Fleming. So you got Chase Young going against Andrew Thomas, who is terrible. Cam Fleming, who, he's not the worst in the league, but he's certainly not great. Going up against Montez Sweat, that's going to be a problem. The reason I have the Giants here to cover is their defense is actually not that bad. And Washington doesn't scare me on offense. They're going to win games because their defense keeps them in any games that they win. They're not going to win games because they outscore you 35-30 or something like that. That's just not happening. And you can say what you want about the Giants as a whole. Their defense is not terrible. It is not that bad. And in fact, if their offense were any better, I think their defense would improve as a result because their offense just can't score. So the defense is on the field all the time. I think if they can improve offensively, they have a really solid defense. Darius Slayton is the key. Had a big game last week, and he gets another favorable matchup this week with Washington secondary. So I like the Giants here -3 at home. The Browns versus the Steelers, +3.5 at Steelers. I am really liking the Browns here. A lot of people like the Steelers. They just don't buy into the Browns, and that's fine. But I love the Browns here, +3.5. Number 1 rushing team versus a team that was just gashed last week by a floundering Eagles team with Miles Sanders. Yes, Miles Sanders is a really good back, but they can't run the football the way Cleveland does. So I love that matchup. And that's going to open up things for the play action for Baker Mayfield. The key for Baker is going to be cleaning up his mechanics. Okay, he's always up on his toes, jumping around, seems a little unnerved in the pocket. That's fine. He's a young quarterback. We see it often. But he's got to clean up the mechanics, got to clean up the decision making, and he's got to slow down in the game. He's playing really, really fast, going through his reads entirely too quickly. Still has that habit of just first read, maybe second read, and takes off. And by take off, I mean he's moving in the pocket. Some of that is due to the pass rush, and that's understandable. But then it leads to later in the game when they need to play. He's moving around, shifting around, bails on the pocket too early, etc., and ends up missing a guy or ends up having to sort of rush his mechanics and ends up making a throw offbeat. He's got to clean that stuff up. I think this is a good opportunity to do so. Browns haven't won 4 straight games since 2009. They haven't won 5 straight since 1994. So this would be a huge win for Cleveland. And for the Steelers, I should say, it really comes down to one thing for them. They got to step up and protect Big Ben because Myles Garrett is coming. Trust me. That dude is coming for Big Ben all day or all. I'm not sure what time it is, but all day and or all night, whatever the case may be, he's coming. Baker's got to step his game up. They're not going to be able to run the ball all the time, especially not against this defense. This defense, say what you want, it's pretty good. And even if this is the number 1 rushing team, they're not going to be able to just go for 200 or 300 yards like they have against other teams this year. Certainly not at the rate they had in recent weeks if Baker can't be trusted because they're going to lock up and they're going to force Baker to throw the football. Pack the box in, don't allow him to run the football, and they're going to make Baker beat him with his arm. He's been extremely sharp in certain moments and very off in others. So they're going to need that. Despite the shift to be a more run-heavy team and a lot more play-action heavy, he has got to step up his game, but I think he will. Like the Browns plus 3.5. The Ravens minus 9.5 at home versus the Eagles. I think the Eagles are in for a long Sunday afternoon. But here's the thing. I don't love the cover. It's a lot of points for 9.5 for the Ravens, even against the Eagles. It just seems, after what I saw on that Monday night, I just don't love it. They got undressed against the Chiefs. And yes, it was early in the season. You know, a lot of expectations and hype and, you know, all that good stuff. It just, when it happens like that, it just doesn't sit right. Like the Bills, for me now, you have a team that hasn't really practiced in 2 weeks. You can say what you want about the protocols and whose fault it was and all that. Bottom line is they hadn't practiced in basically 2 weeks. You got coaches out, you got starters out, and they got boat raced by the Titans. And, you know, when that happens, if it were just a normal week, Titans hadn't missed a week prior with the bye week, if they had played through their schedule like normal and all that good stuff, and this had happened, I wouldn't be as, you know, bothered by it, I guess, if it didn't happen the way it did. 2 weeks, tons of guys out, coaching staff out, you got starters out, and they manhandled the Bills. And that just didn't sit right with me. Same thing for the Ravens and the Chiefs. You come out and you have this big opponent, Super Bowl champs, you're the MVP, and they just didn't show up. And so I don't love the 9.5 points for that reason. It seems like something is off with Baltimore. Maybe I'm just tripping, but I just don't love it. But I'm going to take it just because the Eagles are that bad and just cross my fingers. Bengals plus 8 at the Colts. Yeah, I'm taking the Bengals even against this defense. After what we saw versus Baltimore and the way they got beat up, probably not the best idea going up against what I think is an even better defense. What can the Bengals and Joe Burrow muster up after last week? They got absolutely pushed around by the Ravens, and it's a top 3 defense they're going up against now. I think Ravens are top 10. Definitely falling off a little bit from last year, but they're still a pretty good defense. The Colts are just much better on defense, and it's going to be scary. The reason I'm liking the 8 points and why I'm liking the Bengals is I don't believe they're going to need to score a ton of points because I don't think the Colts are that good offensively, mainly because they don't have a good quarterback. If the Bengals can get to, I think, even 17 to 20, maybe like 24, 23, something like that, I think they could win this game or certainly cover. I don't see the Colts getting to 30 points, even against the Bengals. The Bengals defense isn't terrible, and considering they're going up against a not-so-great offense, they don't need to be excellent. So 8 points to me is more than enough to believe in Joe Burrow and the Bengals. Again, it's scary because that defense is awesome, but I don't think they're going to need a ton of points. What they're going to need is a turnover or two and a big special teams play. Give them a short field, maybe 2 or 3 short fields, and they can cash in and get 10 to 14 points out of that at a minimum. I think they'll be in business to cover. So I like the Bengals at the Colts plus 8. Bucks plus 1 versus the Packers. Tom Brady gets his full complement of weapons, minus O.J. Howard, done for the season with the torn Achilles. No issue. Gets Chris Godwin, got Scotty Miller, you got Mike Evans, you got what's left of Gronk, and you got Rojo and Fournette, and the number 1 defense in football. So I believe what we're going to see this week, given the circumstances, given all the hype and who they're going against, is the Packers. I think you're going to see the best of what Tom Brady is, what he can be. He's had a few weeks with his new team, a few weeks to gel, despite some guys missing injuries. He's now had a chance to soak up the system, soak up the playbook, soak up a little bit of, you know, what his guys do and don't like and what they do well and don't do well. And he's gotten to do all that. No preseason. I iterated this and reiterated this over time, over and over again, I should say. No preseason, no OTAs, not at least not in the way that you're used to. Being with an organization for 20 years and then all of a sudden having to switch with none of those things, I think he's looked pretty good considering all those things. And now that he's had 4 or 5 going on 6 weeks to, like I said, soak everything up and do it all against live bullets. I think you're going to see them start to take off here. And I think it's going to start with the win over the Packers. I actually like them to beat the Packers fairly convincingly. I think the Packers, I don't want to say they're frauds. I'm not quite there yet. I just don't quite think they're cracked up to what their record says that they are. Yeah, they're undefeated. So you can't take that away from them. But you got to really dig in and see who they played. And I'm not a believer in the Packers. Aaron Rodgers playing amazing. I think they'll come down to earth. I think they're going to get handled this week by the Bucs. So I like the Bucs +1. Number 1 defense versus the number 1 offense, with the separator being that one team has a top 10 offense in the Bucs with the number 1 defense, and the other team has a number 1 offense, but they don't have a top 10 defense. That Packers defense is not top 10. Maybe it's 15, 13, 12, something like that. Top 10 it is not. Yeah, I think that's going to be the difference in the game. I think Tom Brady's going to have a much easier time moving the football and scoring points than is Aaron Rodgers against the Bucs. And I think the Bucs win, like I said, pretty convincingly, but basically a point. So they just need to win regardless. I love those odds. The Rams -3 at the 49ers. I'm taking the Rams here -3, but my interest in this game is solely about the 49ers and is almost all about Jimmy G. Why did he get benched last week? I need to know. Yes, he played terrible. But here's the thing, was he playing so bad that after coming back from injury within one game that you bench him against the Dolphins? And maybe that is exactly why he got benched. He was so bad and against a team that's not considered that great that they decided to bench him. That's totally feasible. Was he benched because the injury was still lingering? Were there any lingering effects from the injury? Didn't want to risk it, games getting out of hand, just go ahead and pull him, something along those lines? Or was it something different? I don't know. Doesn't sit right with me. It's not good to see a guy get pulled like that, your starter, especially coming back from injury, and he plays basically one half of football, and he's done. Is it because of the injury, or is it because they were getting beat so bad that they just wanted to make sure he didn't re-injure or re-aggravate anything? Or did they pull him because he was so bad against a team that is pretty bad? And that is what remains to be seen. We'll see how things shake out this week. But I'm not picking to beat the Rams. I like the Rams here, even on the road, -3. And then the last two that we're going to talk about, because there's a few games that I'm not getting into. The Chiefs -4.5 at the Bills. Here's the thing: the Bills got punched in the face last week, and now get to face Patrick Mahomes and Andy Reid and the Chiefs after they too got punched in the face by the Raiders big time after being up by 2 scores on 2 separate occasions. They lost by 2 scores, so they're going to be looking to get right. And I trust them to bounce back from getting punched in the face the way they did, more so than I do the Bills. I think the skid continues for the Bills and that they get rolled yet again this week and people start to question what's going on in Buffalo. I like the Chiefs -4.5 on the road. And finally, Cowboys +1 versus the Cardinals. So I talked about this briefly at the top. For whatever reason, people don't want to admit that Dak Prescott is just okay. He's fine. And so is Andy Dalton. He's fine. People seem to think that there's this Grand Canyon-sized gap between Andy Dalton and Dak Prescott, and I don't see it. And so here's what's going to happen, and I'm getting ahead of it before it happens, because evidently people are on Dak Prescott, which is fine. I got nothing against him. I just don't think he's as good as people claim, but that's okay. Here's what we can't do. When the Cowboys start winning games with Andy Dalton, and they will, okay, you can't say it's the weapons, because Dak has those same weapons, okay? You can't say it's the defense, because Dak played with this same trash defense. None of that stuff has changed, okay? So if Andy Dalton comes in and he looks the same, slightly worse or slightly better, whatever the case, but they are winning football games, sorry. You don't get to say, well, it's because he has CD and Zeke and no, you don't get to do that. You don't get to say, oh, well, it's because the defense decided to start playing for Andy Dalton versus Dak. As much as they say they love Dak Prescott, now all of a sudden they're going to reach deep down and dig it out of their hearts and play for Andy Dalton. No. And you can't say it's the switching of the game plan from airing it out to putting it in his belly of Ezekiel Elliott. You can't say that, because if that's the case, why didn't they switch the game plan with Dak? If they're losing games with the ball in Dak's hands, now you take the ball out of Dak's hands because he's not playing, and you put it into the hands of Ezekiel Elliott. You're telling me that that is not going to look bad for Dak? Yeah, it is. They're taking the ball out of his hands. They're putting the ball into Zeke's belly, and they start winning games. It's not going to look good for Dak Prescott. The only way that this quote unquote goes well for Dak is if they look the same, getting blown out to start games, coming back late, etc., or just losing in general. Or if they just play worse, Andy Dalton stinks, they don't win a game, etc., etc. If Andy Dalton looks the same or better than Dak Prescott in this offense, they start winning some games. Even if they put the ball in Zeke's belly and let Zeke carry them to wins, that's not going to look great for Dak, because that means that's what they should have been doing the whole time. And the fact that they've been letting Dak air the ball out as much as they have when they have Ezekiel Elliott in the backfield, and then for them to do it now, even with Andy Dalton as the quarterback, that's not good. So I don't know what I think Cowboy fans are just in it. It's like a stage of denial, and I don't get it, but it is what it is. I just hope that once Andy Dalton starts winning games, and he will, that we acknowledge what's actually happening here, and we don't just give Dak a pass. Dak has been contributing to this mess as much as he's been trying to dig him out of it. And I think Andy Dalton is going to be the lens into seeing that. All right, and then the final two I have, not going to talk about them in great detail because neither game is going to be very good. Patriots -9.5 versus the Broncos. The Broncos stink right now. They don't have a quarterback. They're missing a lot of the best players, and I don't think their coach is that good. So they got Bill Belichick in New England. They got Cam Newton. Damian Harris, I think, is going to have a big week. 9.5 for the Patriots isn't even enough. It should be like 40. I like the Patriots -9.5. And then the Dolphins -9.5 with the Jets, or versus the Jets. Never in my wildest dreams did I think I would pick the Dolphins in an almost double-digit spread. But they're playing the Jets, and so it's totally feasible, and it's totally reliable because the Jets stink. So there you have it. Picks for Week 6. Those are all the picks in a little bit of detail. Now, it is time to make a little bit of cash money through Draftkings. So let's talk about some plays that I like for this week. Okay, so Draftkings. Usually I would go through and do like must plays and must avoid and sleepers. And I just because of all the upheaval, if you will, in the season this year, I decided to just give you some of my favorite plays for this week. I'm usually going to just do value here, mainly because I think we all know who the obvious plays are, right? Like if you're playing in a week and you don't have, say, like an Alvin Kamara or Aaron Rodgers or a Patrick Mahomes at quarterback, like you got to have some studs on your team. I think everyone knows that, and you got to pick. Obviously, you got to hope that they have the right game on the right week, but you're going to have some stuff. Like you can't have a team full of value players, and vice versa. You can't have a team of just all-stars. And so I think it's a lot easier to pick these studs because that's what they are. So I'm going to just switch to just giving you a few of what I think are good plays for the week. And I got 4 here in particular. First, I got 2 stacks. Kirk Cousins this week with Justin Jefferson versus the Falcons. Listen, the Falcons may get new life with the firing of Dan Quinn, but their defense is still trash. And Kirk Cousins and Justin Jefferson are a pretty cheap stack. I like that stack this week. If you want to get value, or excuse me, if you want to load up at running back elsewhere, and go with a little bit of value at quarterback and receiver. That's a stack I like. An even better one, and probably a more reliable one, and also a really cheap one, is Ryan Tannehill and AJ Brown. Ryan Tannehill is $5,900. AJ Brown is $5,600 this week. That is a steal. In terms of value versus production, that is an absolute steal. Even if they both don't have excellent games, if you can get 20 points out of Ryan Tannehill and 15 to 20 out of AJ Brown at that price, and then stack up elsewhere, and that's just on an average to bad day, they could both easily go for 30 plus. And now you're talking about a big value, big production for that. That's a play I really like. And again, going up against the Texans, they got an opportunity to have another explosive week. And then my last two, value running back, Damian Harris versus the Broncos for the Patriots. I really liked what I saw in their last game. He is what I think they're missing. I think he's been the back they've been trying to find. Someone who can run in between the tackles and catch the ball out of the backfield. James White is excellent catching the ball out of the backfield. Not so great running it straight up and down between the tackles. Sony Michel is the opposite. Not so great catching the ball. He's pretty good at running it in between the tackles. And Rex Burkhead is probably the best mix of both, but he's not great at either one. Probably a little bit better catching it out of the backfield than he is just running it straight up. But overall, he's the most well-rounded. I think Damian Harris is the next level of what a Rex Burkhead could be. Maybe not quite as good catching it out of the backfield. Still pretty decent. But probably the best, just, true running back as far as running in between the tackles, toss plays, etc. I like Damian Harris this week versus the Broncos. He'll get a lot of volume. It's hard because they do have so many running backs in New England, and so you wonder if the volume is going to be there, but I think it is because my eyes tell me that he's the best running back that they have on the roster, and you couple him with Cam Newton, I think they're going to be able to do some special things this week. They're going up against a bad team, so that also helps. And then finally, my last one, Preston Williams versus the Jets. So he had his first big game last week. It's reasonable to expect him to have another big game this week only because he's playing the Jets. Devontae Parker is obviously their best receiver, but I think Preston Williams is not far behind him. And the way Ryan Fitzpatrick has been spreading the ball around in the last few weeks, he's going to get a lot of volume, enough for his value that I think it's totally worth it. And again, he has the opportunity to have a really big day because he's going up against such a bad football team in the Jets. If he gives you a bill and a touchdown, maybe two, or 75 yards and 2 touchdowns, something like that, a bill 25 and a touchdown, you'll get more than enough value and production out of that than you would trying to hope that a big-time stud receiver has a big day. Tyreek Hill is a stud receiver, but there are so many other weapons on the team that I think in this case, you got Gesicki, you got Gaskin, you got Parker, obviously, and then you got Preston Williams. And in terms of pass catchers, Preston Williams is second. You look at someone like the Chiefs with Tyreek Hill, Hardman could have a huge day. A huge day. Sammy Watkins, we've seen, had huge days. Clyde Edwards-Helaire could pop. Travis Kelce could pop. It could be all around, spread the ball around. Whereas with the Dolphins, Gaskin's going to have solid production, but he's not like a true stud. Gesicki's a pretty good tight end, but tight ends typically don't outpace receivers. Not when you have elite talent at receiver and tight end. Like if you look at Kelce and Tyreek Hill in terms of fantasy, even without looking at it, I would guarantee that Tyreek Hill, in terms of raw fantasy points, outproduces Travis Kelce. So for that reason, I like Preston Williams. And again, he's going up against the Jets, so it's hard not to like that matchup. So there you go. That's it. That's what I got for Draftkings. Go make some money, make those plays. There's a few other plays that I like. I really love Andy Dalton this week, but I'm sure a lot of people will, so you're going to have high ownership. But If you're all for it, go for it. I think Andy Dalton is going to have a good day. I would probably stack him with CeeDee Lamb. Maybe even do a 3-way with him and Zeke. He'll throw to Zeke plenty or enough, and then of course Zeke will get his lion's share of the carries. So that's another play I like. There's a few others, but those are the main ones. That's all I got for DraftKings. We've made all the picks, so that's all I got for this episode. We'll be back on Monday to talk about what we saw or what we will see on Sunday, and then obviously to preview the Monday Night Football game and showdown. So until then, I will see you all in the next one. Peace.